welcome to Songkhla Rajabhat University's MOOC course on English for the Workplace. My name is Gary Linton, and today I'm going to talk to you about presentations, presenting data and information for graphs and charts. In today's video, we'll look at some of the basic types of charts. There are dozens of them. We're just going to look at three of the most common you might come across. And we'll look at some useful language for talking about those charts and comparing, analyzing, and evaluating them. So, let's start off by looking at some of the types of graph. One of the most common graphs you'll come across are line graphs, like the one here on screen, which shows international tourist arrivals in the millions. Some of the key information that you'll find on a chart like this, the title. So the title tells you what the graph's about. The key, that explains what the information means. So this is the key here. Tells you the countries in which each colour represents. The scale. Scale is the numbers. So here we have the numbers down the side. It's going up in groups of 10, but it's important to remember that that's in millions. It's not just 10, it's 10 million, 20 million. And at the bottom, it's years. While it doesn't specifically say years anywhere, you can guess this means 1995, 2000, at 5-year gaps. So those are the scales. Label, that's anything that's written on the chart, any more text or information. This particular graph doesn't have any labels apart from those. And the X and Y axis. So we have our X axis, the horizontal, and the Y axis, which is the vertical up and down. So these are different parts you might talk about with your graph. Let's move on to some ways of talking about the information. So first of all, we may want to talk about things going up. You see much of the line here, the green line goes up. So we can talk about this as rise, or a rise in sales, or to increase, an increase in sales, to go up. If it goes up from 10 to 20, we could say to double, or we can say just it climbs. So lots of vocabulary to mean going up. We have the opposite when things go down. You see here the red line starts by going down very quickly. So to decrease or a decrease, to decline, to go down, to fall, to drop, anything that means to go down can be used here to describe the data. Sometimes it goes up or down a lot. You can see the red line here. The drop, the fall, is very steep. From 5 years ago, it goes from 80 million down to less than 30 million. So it's a dramatic drop, a steep or a sharp drop. And we can use these terms to add to the rise and increase. A dramatic decline, or declined dramatically. So depending on whether we use whether we're using as a noun or a verb, we can use different terms. Okay? Sometimes the increase is much softer, or the decrease. Here between 2005 and 2010, you can see our black line going up, it's increasing or rising. So to rise, but only a little bit. So it's a slight rise. To rise slightly. So we can put these together in any kind of combination. To rise slightly, a slight rise. To rise gradually, to rise gradually, a gradual rise. These terms, steady. This could be slight or dramatic. Steady really means the same all the time. So here the green line is rising steadily. It's quite steep, but it's always the same. Here the red line is going up, but it's not steady. Between 2000 and 2005 it rises slowly before rising faster between 2005 and 2010. So we can use the terms to describe each part of the data and mix them up. When you're speaking or when you're writing about the information on graphs, use a variety of language to keep it interesting. Some other terms you might use. To reach a peak or a high point. Here on the green line, we can see the highest point. To reach a peak, like a mountain. The opposite of that, to bottom out or to reach a low point. On our little black line here, you can see the lowest point before rising again to bottom out, as opposed to the highest point to reach a peak. To fluctuate or a fluctuation, that's when we go up and down. So our blue line is an example of fluctuation. Sales fluctuate dramatically. Remain or hold steady, stable, and we can see that on the red line. There's no change in the numbers. It stays steady. Remain constant. Remain consistent. When we have a rise or fall before the flat area, we can use the term to level off or to plateau. And that shows a change from rising or falling onto a flat area. The other important language for line graphs, they're often used to describe data over time. So one of the axes will often be a time period. So we can use terms for the period, the time we're talking about. Between 2000 and 2005, the black line decreased slightly for the period. Since 2000, that would mean anything from 2000 onward. So since 2000, something has happened. From 2000 to 2010, an inclusive area. So a beginning and an end. Pretty much the same as between 2000 and 2010. And if we want to know one particular point, in 2005. So the black line reached a low point in 2005. So those are some vocabulary terms we can use to describe the data. As a general rule, we look for patterns and trends. If you're worried about how to describe many lines, start at the top to bottom, left to right. Start with the top line, the highest, work your way down and describe each one left to right. It keeps it simple. The next type of chart we want to look at will be pie charts, but I just want to give you an example of using line graphs to describe one. So let's take a look. This is the original chart we looked at. The graph shows, you could say, illustrates, demonstrates, tells you the millions of tourists from abroad who arrive in each of 5 countries at 5 yearly intervals between 1995 and 2010. So we're highlighting the time period between 1995 and 2010. Overall, every country saw an increase. Every country has gone up from their start point to their end point. None of them are lower than they were at the beginning. Every 5 years. With the exception of the USA, who saw a slight decrease, the only change going down is the last 5 years. A slight decrease, it's very slow in the numbers from 2005 and 2010. So that's an example of using some of that language to describe the data we see. We want to carry on and express the rest of the information. So now we want to look at the main description of the data we see in the graph. Time periods. In 1995, the beginning of the chart, the USA had by far the most international tourists. As I said, start at the top, left to right. Just over 70 million. The figure increased to 85 million by 2000 and reached a peak of a little over 90 million. So we can see around 85 million in 2000 and a peak of a little over 90 million before declining slightly, going down again. The largest growth in international tourist arrivals was in France, so our second country, moving down top to bottom, left to right, who saw a 200% increase. We started at around 30 million and finished up close to 90 million, so almost 200% increase. It's not exact, but close enough. Going from just over 30 million in 1995 to match the USA at 90 million in 2010. Malaysia tourist arrivals increased steadily. So Malaysia, our third country, and we can see the lines very, very flat, no bumps or funks. For the first 10 years, going from around 22 million to 35 million, before increasing more dramatically, more steeply, between 2005 and 2010, finishing just below 50 million. So again, just below, just under, terms to mean not exactly. We can't be specific. There's no actual numbers provided on the graph. So we can show it's general by saying around, approximately, just below, just above. In 1995, Brazil had slightly more tourist arrivals than Egypt. Brazil, our reddish line here, and Egypt, our yellowish gold line. And they're almost the same place, but the red's just above. But by 2000, this situation had reversed. So Egypt increased more quickly. and both countries' numbers continued to increase. They both go up, with Egypt growing a little faster than Brazil. So we're getting a little more growth for Egypt than Brazil, and they're pulling away very slightly. So those descriptions use some of the phrases and show you essentially what the graph contains. Let's move on to our second kind of chart, a pie chart. Pie charts are another very common way of representing data. Remember, if you're describing a pie chart, it always represents one, a whole. In this case, it's the population of the Earth, the world, in 2017. Here we have the title of the chart at the top, as you would expect, countries in the world by population 2017. Key, the same as for our line graph, usually on the side. It could be in other places like at the bottom, but it gives you an idea of what each segment represents, in this case by colour. Label, in this case we do have labels. The labels show the actual number, and the numbers here with M means in millions. Segment or section, that's each of these little coloured pieces. So here we have the segment, the section representing China. We can also use slice or group and country to represent each of these. So we could be talking about China as the country, each segment, each slice. And depending what the chart represents, the vocabulary might change slightly. So, what kind of words can we use to describe pie charts? With a pie chart, we use terms like the majority, most, or a large number. That would be in a situation when, on the chart, this area here, which I'll show you quickly, represents the majority. Most of the students in class are women. A minority, a small proportion, a smaller number are men. We can use percentages. If I draw a line across the middle, half. Two halves make a whole. 50% or 1 in 2. I could change that to be a third. Basically divide the chart into 3 equal sections, each one representing a third, or perhaps 4 equal parts, 25%. Forgive my rough drawing, but you get the idea. 1 in 4 people are X, 1 in 4 people are Y, 1 in 4 people are Z, and 1 in 4 are something else, other. 2/5. So again, another way of representing the portions. If we imagine 5 sections, 2 of the 5 sections, roughly 2/5. And you can use those a sixth, a tenth, and so on, or a percentage, or actual numbers. Again, we'll often use terms like more than, a little more than, a lot more, slightly more, or a little less than. And also words like around, approximately, almost. These tell us not exactly, not precise numbers, but just close to in that area. And often that's enough to show our meaning. Let's take a look at an example of how that works in reality by, again, looking at a chart of the countries by world population. You can see the largest segment here is others. That means every other country. If we describe this particular chart, the chart represents, previously in the last time we said shows, same meaning, the population of the world in 2017, and is divided to show the 7 most populous countries individually, with the remaining 200 nations and territories grouped together under others. So the most populous, they're the countries with the largest populations. While it doesn't state that on the graph, it just happens to be something that I know and can verify easily. Figures for each are rounded to the nearest million. So I'm just clarifying here that the 1383 M means 1383 million. Obviously the population to an exact number would have 682 or something, but closest to the nearest million. So we round up or round down as required. So here we're getting into describing the detail of the content. Others represents the sum population of over 200 countries. So I can say that with reasonable confidence. However, somewhat surprisingly, this represents slightly less than 50%. So other represents 50%. This phrase I use here, somewhat surprisingly. It was a surprise to me that the proportions of the world are quite so large. Just 7 countries is more than half the entire population. I thought it would have been slightly the other way, but I was wrong. If you're doing academic writing, we tend not to use phrases like that because we only state facts, not opinions. So we don't need to include that. But normally, we give opinions and viewpoints when we describe data. What do we think it represents? So it's okay to include. And we include the actual number, 3,616,000,000 people. Of the remaining 7 nations, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. China and India each account for more than the remaining 5 combined. And you can see that from the chart. Each one representing 1.3 billion and the sum total coming to just over 1.2 billion. Representing more than a sixth of all the people living on the earth. So 1 in 6 people who live on earth are in China or India, with populations of 1,383 million and 1,314 million respectively. Using the term respectively simply shows these numbers are in the same order as the countries I've listed. China and India. So the first one is China and the second one is India. And that's quite a common phrase to use to describe a list of countries or a number of things together. We can name the 3 or 4 items and then the data respectively in the same order. From there, we look at the remaining 5 countries in descending order of population, so going from the biggest to the smallest. The remaining 5 nations, my apologies, I've duplicated the remaining. So I shouldn't have said that twice, sorry about that. 5 nations are the USA with 325 million, Indonesia with 264 million, Brazil with 207 million, Pakistan with 197 million, and finally Nigeria with 192 million. So each of those, just a list explaining the actual numbers for all the countries. We'll take a shorter, brief look at bar charts here. Very similar, same ideas. We have a title, we have a key, just two groups here, scales, the number of students, labels. This is a label here. It tells you that it's the number of students. The X and Y axis again. So the X axis is often years over time. And here we have bar charts with a bar representing boys and girls in each year. We can use the same basic language as before, making comparisons. The number of boys increased. Compare boys to girls each year, compare year by year. There are dozens of kinds of tables and charts you can describe. Most of the language is similar that you use to describe them, but there are a few things. These are columns, for example, that we would talk about. If we talk about a table, we'd have rows and columns and so on. So make sure before describing data to people, you understand all the vocabulary you need for the chart or the type of graph you're talking about. Let's take a look at some useful phrases you might be able to use when we want to compare or analyze the data or evaluate. So, when we compare, taking two pieces of information or more, and we use comparative and superlative here. For example, A is a little more or a little less than B. The largest, the smallest, the most, the least. These are superlatives. So we're using that for the extremes. A is bigger or smaller than. Double, treble, triple. Treble and triple basically mean the same thing. You can use either one. Quadruple. Double times 2. Treble times 3. Quadruple times 4. We also use a fold increase or decrease to mean a multiplication. A 2-fold increase. A 5-fold increase. A 10-fold increase in sales over the past 5 years. Or we can say things are the same. A is the same as B. A is equal to B. A is matched by B. So those phrases help you make comparisons to other bits of data. We can also use the number of, the percentage, the amount, the value, or the proportion along with those phrases. So the proportion of students is the same as the proportion of girls is slightly greater than, and so on. So those are some various phrases you can put together in combination to help you describe the data when we want to compare. The next element, we have to analyze the data and some phrases to help describe the parts. Here we might say an overall summary, talking about the generals. If you remember back to our chart showing international arrivals, overall, every country increased. Overall, there has been. Generally, there is. Allows you to introduce information that's true for everything. If we want to highlight a particular point, what you can see, and often we would point to a particular part of the graph during our presentation. From the graph we can see, just highlighting visible information. I'd like to focus your attention on. You want to attract people to look at a particular piece of data. I'd like to focus your attention on the USA and show that country's data. If you look at this, you'll see, you'll notice, you'll understand. You can again attract people to particular information you want to describe. A key significant area is. Two key significant areas are. So don't forget to use the right to verb tenses or are if it's singular or plural. So these are a few phrases to help draw your audience or readers or listeners' attention to the data you want them to see. The final one I want to just touch on is a little bit about giving opinions. So a few more phrases for analysing. An important point is, two important points I'd like to illustrate are, illustrate's another word for show, demonstrate. What is interesting here is, again you'd be pointing to a particular part of a graph or chart. An interesting observation. We use the word interesting because we want to highlight that this is something important. An analysis of the graph shows us, illustrates, or just looking at the blue line, looking at the number of girls, just draws attention to particular data. So, some phrases for evaluating. This is again, if you ever do graph writing as an academic subject for IELTS, for example, we don't do this. We don't evaluate. Evaluating means giving your opinion or drawing conclusions from the data. So in the real world, that's what we do. We have graphs and we decide why something happened. Why did it go up? Why did it go down? Why was France doing better than other countries? So some of the phrases. This seems to suggest that. This is possibly because of. Seems to and possibly tell us we're not 100% sure. It's just maybe. This is clearly due to. The clearly makes it strong. Very sure that this is the reason. This is due to. This is because of. But that's more certain than seems to or possibly. One reason for this could be, again, a suggested idea. Why does it happen? And maybe. An evaluation of this data suggests. An evaluation of this data provides evidence for. An evaluation of this data highlights or draws out an important point. To provide evidence for my previous point, the graph highlights. So you may be talking about our sales have been increasing. Evidence is shown by and linked to the graph. Overall, this highlights the significance of. Therefore, this provides evidence that. So these are ways to draw the conclusions you've reached about your data and steer your audience towards the outcome you want. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you'll find the vocabulary useful if you need to describe graphs or charts. There is so much variety out there. Just take time to prepare. We do have some questions at the end. Please give those a try. Thank you very much for listening today. Goodbye.